Hi, it's Lauren, and welcome to another Whimsy Stamps video. I'm going to be sharing how I created a Slimline shaker card using the brand new Slimline Hourglass die set, as well as some other dies from Whimsy Stamps, as well as the Hourglass sand sprinkles, so you can make your very own Hourglass shaker card. I have a piece of mixed media paper that I cut to be larger than the hourglass part, the hourglass die of the die set. And I'm going to be distressing using some distress oxides onto this mixed media paper. I am starting with an orange color. This is carved pumpkin, and I want it to be kind of a glowing look inside of my hourglass. So I am just laying down a little bit using my die as a guide, just so I know the placement of where I want that orange color to be. And then I'm going to come in with purple, which is Wilted Violet, and I am going to add this color to the rest of this piece of cardstock. And then as I get closer to the orange, I'm just going to bring in a smaller brush that I have here to bring in that purple into the orange without making it too muddy. So I'm just slowly bringing in that color and just blending it in with the orange so it looks more like a glow and not a muddy color in between the purple and the orange. So I'm sharing how I did one of the sides of my hourglass, and then I'm going to go ahead and do the other one off camera. And once I'm happy with how it's blended together, I do bring in my larger brush and just try to make sure it looks nice. A lot of this is going to be covered, so I'm not being overly detailed, I guess you can say, in how much ink and my blending and everything. So I also brought in my sprayer to get some water droplets, and it's creating a fun look on my background. And I'm just making sure I'm happy with it by using my die again as a guide to make sure that it's going to look how I want it to look. And I'm going to run it through my die cut machine. I've also brought out a black distress oxide. This is black soot. And I'm just going along the edges of my hourglass on the sides. I don't do the top and the bottom because those will be covered by other die cuts from this set. And once that is done, I'm going to work on the rest of the card. So my hourglass, this purple and orange piece, will be in the background of my shaker. And the foreground, I want it to be this kind of pearlescent black card. It has like a pearly sheen to it, I guess I should say, instead of pearlescent. It's a black cardstock with kind of this pearl sheen to it, kind of a glimmer paper, and it's not glittery. And I'm going to glue this onto my background. Well, I'm going to use it as a guide to glue my purple part to my background. So I'm just placing it onto my card base, which is a Slimline card base. It's 3.5 by 8.5 once scored. I'm going to use some wet glue behind my hourglass cutout, and that way it will give me a little bit of wiggle room. I have my black pearl paper lined up on my card base, exactly how it's going to go later on, and I'm using that as my guide to glue down that purple piece. So that is the back of my shaker, and the black part will be the front of my shaker. So this is what my acetate is going to be adhered to. So I've cut a piece of acetate to fit just behind this black piece, and I'm going to use some 1/4 inch double-sided adhesive to adhere that down. I just traced the hourglass so I can make sure it has a nice fit behind the black paper, my acetate, and I'm going to adhere that down. I'm going to make sure it is firmly pressed against the acetate so that way there is a good seal and my acetate won't move or adjust under my shaker. So you can see I'm just making sure that I have it in the right way and I know how to adhere them together once I'm ready to put my window on top of my shaker. I'm going to be using some thin 1/8 of an inch strip double-sided foam tape because I am using sand. I'm not using any really thick shaker bits. It's actually really thin, so I can use a thin piece of foam tape, which is really nice for this shaker card. And I'm going to go all the way around my hourglass, just making sure that I don't have any gaps where two pieces of the foam tape will meet up. The also nice thing about this thin foam tape so it's easy to bend around the curves of my hourglass. I actually remove both sides of the adhesive release tape, and that gives me the ability to maneuver that foam tape around my hourglass. Now that that's done, I'm going to put some sand into my hourglass. Now when I opened it, as you can see, the sand looks kind of like it's wet sand. It's not wet. It's not like my fingers aren't wet from patting the sand down into where I want it to be in my hourglass, but it's not dry sand. So I don't know how to explain it, but it will dry in my shaker card. And it's very easy to move the sand around. So if you open it and you're like, this is strange, don't worry. It dries and it becomes the perfect sand shaker card. So once I have sand where I want it, I'm going to get a brush because I got a little bit of sand where I didn't want it outside of my shaker area. So I'm just brushing that away with a brush, and then I will just swipe that into my waste basket under my desk. And now I can put my shaker together. So again, just cleaning that up, making sure I have it lined up perfectly in the center and placing that down. As you can see, I now have my sand shaker. So again, it looks a little clumpy right now, but don't worry, it dries and it moves very nicely inside of the shaker. Okay, so on to the next. I'm realizing that I didn't put any foam tape in the spots where it's a little thicker at the center of my shaker. So I'm just going to shove in a couple pieces of foam tape just to make sure it's nice and sturdy and my card will hold up to being used by my card receiver, hopefully, by shaking that shaker card and having the hourglass go in between the two spots. I have a sentiment already die cut out. It is the Eek sentiment from the new Eek Word and Shadow die set. I also have some spider webs and spiders die cut from the Spiders and Webs die set, which is also new. And I'm just playing around and kind of figuring out how I want my card to be laid out. I think I'm going to use 2 webs, just kind of like this, and I'm just going to pick 1 spider. And then I realized, oh, before I glue that on, I need to finish my hourglass. So I finished die cutting my hourglass out of some gray cardstock. It has a bit of a texture to it because I wanted it to look like a wooden hourglass. So I am gluing the top and bottom pieces directly to my card base, and then I will glue on the kind of stands for the hourglass. So I want to tuck my spider webs inside of my hourglass. So before my top and bottom gets too dry, or the bottom for right now, I'm just going to tuck that spider web in. I'm going to trim off different parts of it to make it look like the spider web is going around the hourglass and towards the left. So I'm just using some small scissors to trim off any part of my die cut that I don't want, and I'm using wet glue to adhere it down. I'm only going to show how I put together the bottom part of my web and hourglass because the top is pretty much the same thing. Again, just trimming off what I don't want and then using wet glue to adhere down my web. I also am going to trim off any of the parts of the web that go off of my card base. So you can see that there's a couple pieces that I'm just going to use my little scissors and trim those off. And then also use glue to make sure that any of those pieces now that are kind of singular parts of the web, because I trimmed off where they were all joining together, is glued down as well. And once I'm done with that, like I said, I'm going to move on to the top, but I'm going to go ahead and do that off camera because you don't need to see me gluing down a spider web twice. So I'm really excited about this new sand for our shaker. I think it's also going to be really great for summer cards as well, maybe making a beach shaker. So make sure you stock up on your sand sprinkles, not only for Halloween and for our hourglass, but for beachy shaker cards as well. And now for the stands that are what help support the hourglass. I realized that I should have glued these down before the top and bottom bases of my hourglass were completely dry, but that's okay. I'm just gonna work with it here. So I trimmed off one of the ends so that way it would fit under the top of my hourglass stand here, and then using wet glue to just glue that down. So on the top, it will be under the stand, and on the bottom, it will be in the front. But that's okay. It still looks really cool, and I'm really happy with how it's turning out. And I did that on both sides. And now for my spider and my sentiment, I'm just going to play around with my layout until I'm happy with where they're going to go. My spider is going to go on that lower spider web, and then the eek sentiment will be at the top. I originally glued it down, but I didn't like the way it looked. It felt kind of flat, so I thought about using some foam tape. So I brought out that 1/8 of an inch tape again and popped that up, and I think that really helped elevate the card. So here is the final shaker. As you can see, my sand is already starting to move and it looks really great inside. I absolutely love this, and I'm so excited to see what everyone else makes with this awesome new slimline die and sand sprinkles. You can use the description down below to see a list of everything that I used to create this card. Also, join us on our Instagram, Pinterest, and Facebook group for more inspiration. Thanks so much for watching. Have a good day.